Hey folks, how's it going? Rome Gaming here, back with another video. In today's episode, I wanted to announce that I'm going to be swapping focus to a new main for the remainder of Dragonflight, and will be stepping away from my Restoration Shaman for the time being. Now, that being said, I do plan to stay on top of guides with Restoration Shaman moving forwards, but I'm honestly finding some of the other healing classes, such as Mistweaver Monk, Holy Paladin, and Discipline Priest, to be extremely fun at the moment. Well, at the moment, I can probably push higher keys on my Restoration Shaman just because I'm more familiar with the class. I'm not finding the joy out of it that I've had in previous seasons. So with that being said, my goal going forward will be to achieve Keystone Hero on my Holy Paladin, Mistweaver Monk, and Discipline Priest by the end of the Dragonflight expansion. Now, if I do end up hitting Keystone Hero a little bit earlier than expected, I will try to push up to 3k IO on each healer. In addition to all that, I'll be continuing to make class guides and just learning the ins and outs of each spec, as it's the first time I've ever really picked these classes up. So going forward, I hope to share my journey with you all, and I hope to be pushing into the low 20 key range within the next month or so on each of these classes. So just to kind of bring you guys up to speed on where my Holy Paladin's sitting, he's sitting at around 440 eye level. My Mistweaver Monk is not too far ahead of that. I think he's sitting at around like 445 eye level. And then my Priest is pretty low. He's only at like 415 eye level. So I've got a lot of catching up to do on him. So starting out with the Holy Paladin, this was pretty much my first real attempt at healing a dungeon on this tune this season. For the most part, the dungeon was fine. We ended up wiping on the first boss as I stood in his frontal or in his charge. And we ended up getting the boss to about I'd say about 1% health, sub 1% health. And of course, we ended up wiping, so we had to reset and just run back. And we ended up killing him on the next pull. I also had a few other misplays towards the end of the dungeon, standing in swirlies and whatnot. And this all kind of brings me to my point. I think that Holy Paladin being such a high APM class is going to take some getting used to, as I'm finding myself staring at my bars a lot more compared to other healing classes. But I think it's something that I'll be able to get used to with a little bit more practice. I'm also really liking how Daybreak restores mana per glimmer, and how Divine Revelation synergizes with our Judgment. I feel like I literally just don't have any mana issues on this class, so that's a really good positive. But on the flip side, I do sort of feel that my Holy Power spenders are a little weak. Word of Glory and Light of Dawn just don't feel super impactful at the moment. Maybe that'll change as I get some more gear. I'm not 100% sure on that. But right now, they kind of feel like a wet noodle. Another thing that feels a bit weird is that my AoE healing is tied to cooldowns. I feel like if I don't manage them properly, I can get hung up in an awkward situation where I can't just burst heal. I can't just spam chain heals to get through a super difficult burst phase, right? I have to have one of those cooldowns to get me through it. So for the most part, it's not been a big deal, but I'm sure as I start to push higher into keys, I have to be a little bit more thoughtful of the order that I'm pressing my cooldowns in, right? I've got to be able to stagger them in such a way to where I'm not just putting all my eggs into one basket on one big pool and then just not having anything to utilize on the next big pool. And then we also have a lot of utility that I'm still trying to figure out as well, like how to bop, how to use Blessing of Sacrifice, that sort of deal. But hasn't been too terrible yet. I've got to figure out all the cheese mechanics that you can do with bop. I think I was reading that you can use it on Thorns on one of the bosses in Waycrest Manor. So I'm sure there's a lot of cheeky things like that you can use it for, but still learning in that regard. Then, as I mentioned earlier, I also have a Mistweaver Monk that I'm starting, and to be honest, this has been my favorite healer out of the bunch. Everything just seems to flow so well. They have great sustained HPS, great burst healing with Soothing Mist. We also have Spinning Crane Kick, which has to be one of the most satisfying spells in the game to press. And on top of that, our mob control's great. We can sweep kick. We have pretty decent defensives, especially with Life Cocoon being on like a 1.5 minute cooldown. And then, of course, on top of that, you just have a ton of mobility with Tiger's Lust and with Roll, having 2 charges of Roll. One thing that I am slightly struggling with is Feline Stomp. It does feel a little awkward if you drop it and the tank moves the mobs out of the Feline, because then you have to wait 20 seconds for it to come back off cooldown, which feels pretty terrible. So I've got to practice a bit more on holding it until I feel that mobs are done being moved around. Another thing that feels pretty broken at the moment is Mana Tea. It just seems pretty bonkers. Like a fully stacked Mana Tea is restoring like 20% of my mana. And pairing that with like a mana potion and the energizing brew talent really seems to be helping me out, and I don't hardly have any mana issues on this class. And then finally, we have Discipline Priest. I think this one's going to give me the most trouble. I really enjoy the class, but I feel like I'm always a step or two behind when playing it. You've got to be pretty careful with getting your atonement out, and you need to be a bit more reactive to any sort of damage that's going to come out. I also have a hard time remembering, for some reason, to power infuse people. I'm sure there's some sort of add-on or weak aura that will help me out with that, but I haven't found it yet. So if you guys have one of those, please drop it in the comments below. I'd love to download it or check it out. Now, while Discipline Priest is a little bit difficult to play, I feel like this will be the most rewarding healer to play. I think this class is really going to challenge me and make me think a bit differently about healing compared to what I'm used to with Restoration Shaman or Restoration Druid. One thing I also noticed about Discipline Priest is how few buttons there are compared to other classes. It probably has half the buttons as a Restoration Druid, maybe even a third, which is pretty wild to me. But even with fewer buttons, keeping up with atonements, managing power ward shields, managing power infusions, trying to get out as many smites as possible for a Mindbender in our tier set really gives you a lot to juggle at any given time, which has been a little bit frustrating with me, at least so far. But as things start to click, it is becoming one of my favorite healers. So I guess with all that being said, I've got a lot of work to do. I've got 2 healers that are below 445 eye level. I've got 1 healer that's below 420 eye level. I'm hoping over the next few weeks to make a few compilations of my Mythic Plus dungeons, throw them all into one video per week to keep you guys up to date with the progress. In addition to all that, expect to see a lot more guides and healing content released on this channel. And if you guys enjoyed the video, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel, and we will see you on the next one.